In this Learn to Sew video, we are going to learn how to use our sewing machine and sew a straight line to connect two pieces of fabric and make a beginner strip quilt. Let's get started.
I'm Andy, and this is True Blue Quilts, a place to enjoy, experiment, and excel as you quilt.
For basic sewing, the control is the foot pedal. This piece sits on the floor underneath your machine and you press it just like you would press the gas pedal in your car. And the force that you use, you can press it part way down and go slower, or you can press it all the way down and your stitches will move a lot faster. Some computerized machines also have settings, a knob or a switch where you can adjust the speed of your machine. Since there are so many different sewing machines out there and I have stuck with one type of machine, I'm not going to go into great detail, but don't be afraid to use some scrap material and practice all the different settings on your particular sewing machine. It will become your best friend. For the Scrappy strip quilt that I want to make, it will be very similar to a jelly roll race, and I will link that video for you to check out as soon as we're done. I have a big variety of strips, and I need to start with one long piece of fabric. So I need to sew the short ends of my two pieces first. And I'm going to show you two ways to sew that seam. You can sew a straight seam or a diagonal seam. We'll start with the straight seam first. The straight seam is the basic seam you will use in all of your quilting blocks. For this one, I've got two pieces of fabric the same width, and I'm going to match up those short ends, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch right across the edge. I have added some markings to my machine that show me exactly where that 1/4 inch is. The lines on my sewing machine are also built-in guides for your fabric, and you can find some special presser feet that also have markings that tell you where to line up your fabric. I'm going to position my fabric for that 1/4 inch seam, lower the presser foot, and start sewing, guiding the fabric all the way underneath the needle. My machine also has built-in scissors, so I can snip the thread, raise the presser foot, and there I have a straight seam. The other type of seam is a diagonal seam. We're going to sew across our strip at a diagonal, and this uses up a little more fabric. So if you are trying not to have very much waste or scraps left over, then you definitely would want to just use a straight seam. But some people prefer the look of this diagonal seam, so let me show you how to do that. We are going to line up our fabrics and make an L. We want a right angle there between our two strips of fabric. I also want that to be a 1/4 inch. So I'm using my Purple Fang little stiletto tool that has this 1/4 inch guide on one end, and I'm going to make sure my fabrics overlap at a 1/4 inch. And I've got a 1/4 inch all around. So now I'm going to place some pins in to hold that fabric down. You want one pin near the outside edge of the fabric and one pin near the inside corner. You do not want to sew into that inside corner. Your fabric won't unfold and make one continuous strip. We will be sewing from corner to corner on that overlap. Some people may want to mark that line. You can use a chalk pencil or a washable pen to mark that line if you would rather have a solid line. I like to sew by sight and just learn to eyeball those measurements and where I'm going with my fabric. So I position that first intersection right under my needle and I'm eyeballing that line. That's where my markings on my sewing machine come in. When those are uncovered, I know I am going in a straight line. And I'm going to sew that diagonal line. Cut the threads and you can see that stitching line goes from corner to corner. When we take the pins out and unfold, we have a continuous strip of fabric. We will trim away those excess and those can go in your scrap basket as bonus triangles, as Bonnie Hunter likes to say. And I will press that open and you can see I have a diagonal seam. It really is personal preference whether you use a straight seam or a diagonal seam. The straight seam can get a little bulky at those intersections, and there is a little bit less of that bulk with a diagonal seam, so that may influence your decision. Some people just prefer the look of one or the other. Since this is going to be a very scrappy strip quilt, I don't really have a preference. It may be a little bit faster just to sew the straight seam. I don't need any pins. I can just continue adding pieces on that. So grab a jelly roll or a variety of strips of fabric and start sewing them together in one long row. In the next video, I will show you how to put those together in a jelly roll race style strip quilt. So I will see you back here next week. Happy sewing, everyone.
A jelly roll is a collection of pre-cut strips of fabric. The Fat Quarter shop shown here is one online example, but I encourage you to visit your neighborhood quilt shop and shop local whenever you can. We want those neighborhood stores to stay in business. Sewing a straight seam is the first step on your quilting journey. Check out the video linked below for some baby quilt ideas that are perfect as a first quilt project. Subscribe to this channel and I'll be back next week with more quilty goodness.